The night is dark and echoing with vampires.
The first thing that hits her is sound, not gradually, not the slow return of consciousness that sleep produces. All of it simultaneously at a volume that has no human equivalent, every heartbeat in the building registering as its own distinct rhythm, every conversation 3 rooms away, arriving with the clarity of someone speaking directly into her ear, the creak of the church's foundation settling under its own weight, the specific frequency of fluorescent lights buzzing in a pattern she can feel in her back teeth. Elena Gilbert is dead. She knows this the way she knows her own name. Not as grief, not yet, as information. Her brain catalogs it with the same flat efficiency that it catalogs everything else arriving in this first overwhelming second of vampire consciousness. Dead. Transitioned. Changed. Her body running on something other than what it ran on 12 hours ago. Every system recalibrated. Every input dialed to a register that human Elena could not have accessed with any amount of effort. Human Elena, that's already past tense, and she's been awake for 4 seconds. She opens her eyes. The room resolves with a precision that stops her breath. Every detail present simultaneously, the grain of the wood on the pew to her left, the specific way dust moves in the light coming through the stained glass, the exact distance to the door, the exact number of people within earshot, the exact location of every heartbeat in the building. She counts them without deciding to. 8, 9. The habit installs itself before she has a name for it. And then, cutting through all of it, one specific heartbeat. She has been listening to that heartbeat for 2 years. Learned it the way you learn a song that gets inside you before you've consciously heard it. Present in the background of her life until it became the background. She knows its rhythm at rest versus when he's worried. Knows the specific acceleration of it when he's trying to stay calm. Knows, without looking, without needing to look, exactly where he is. Her first word is Stefan. Damon is closer. She registers this without looking, his heartbeat placing him approximately 4 feet to her left. Stefan somewhere down the hall. Damon moved faster, of course he did. He's been moving toward her faster than Stefan for 2 years, and she has understood this, has felt the weight of it, has managed it with the careful precision of someone navigating a thing they can see clearly, but cannot name without causing damage. She turns her head and looks at him. His face does the thing it does when it's trying not to show what it's showing. The controlled surface that has never quite controlled the eyes. He's watching her with the specific quality of attention she has always been aware of. The kind that waits for something, that has been waiting for something, that organized itself around a particular hoped-for outcome, and is currently running the assessment of whether that outcome is arriving. She feels the sire bond the way you feel for a bruise, pressing the specific location to check if the sensitivity is there. Nothing. Clean. Absent. The space where it should be, according to everything she's read and been told about how this works, is simply empty. No pull. No override. No external signal competing with her own assessment of the room. What she feels for the man standing 4 feet to her left is exactly what she has always felt for him, nothing more and nothing less. Care, complicated history, gratitude for the specific ways he has challenged her and saved her and refused to let her be anything other than awake. Real feeling. Her feeling. Hers alone, and what she feels down the hall, in the specific direction of that heartbeat she has been cataloging for 2 years. That is something else entirely. That is the thing that was always true. Stefan appears in the doorway. He reads her face in the fraction of a second before she speaks, and something in his expression settles. Not relief exactly. Not yet. Something more fundamental than relief. Recognition. The specific recognition of a person seeing clearly what they were afraid they might not get to see. She says, "Hey." The conversation with Damon happens in the Salvatore boarding house 3 hours later. 3 hours of transition management, feeding, the first terrifying overwhelm of blood smell, the specific discipline of pulling back, Stefan's hand on her arm, and his voice steady in his heartbeat telling her what she needed to know before the words did. She had asked him once what it was like, the feeding, and he had told her carefully, and she had thought she understood, and she had understood nothing. The reality arrived not as information, but as sensation, total and immediate and requiring every available processing unit to manage. She managed it. That surprised her. The managing of it. She had spent years adjacent to the supernatural world watching what it did to people, cataloging the casualties, carrying the weight of every person who got pulled in by proximity to her and paid for it. She had anticipated the transition as its own casualty, another thing the supernatural world took. Instead, she stood in the boarding house kitchen with animal blood in a glass and felt, for the first time since the bridge, not afraid. She sat with that, let it be true, turned it over, more confident, less self-doubting. The report her brain kept generating about every possible threat, every possible failure, every person she might lose, it was quieter, not gone, but quieter. The vampire pragmatism arriving not as callousness, but as clarity, the specific clarity of a system that has been recalibrated to stop spending processing power on fears it cannot control. Stefan was watching her do this. He didn't interrupt it. That was the right call. The wrong call would have been to fill the silence with comfort, with reassurance, with the tender management of her feelings that she had been receiving from well-intentioned people since the night her parents died, and that had always landed slightly wrong, slightly insufficient, because what she had actually needed was not someone to tell her it was going to be okay, but someone to let her assess whether it was going to be okay for herself. Stefan let her assess. She looked at him and said, "I'm not scared," he said. "Is that bad?" He said, "It's you." Damon comes downstairs with the bourbon he has been pretending not to need since she woke up. She hears him on the stairs before he enters, the specific weight of his footstep, the particular rhythm of someone walking towards something they have been preparing for. She tracks his heartbeat without deciding to. It is elevated, not dramatically, just enough. He sits, he looks at her the way he has been looking at her for 2 years, the way that has always meant something specific, the way she has always known what it meant without letting herself say it out loud, because saying it out loud would have required dealing with it. Vampire clarity does not permit the luxury of not saying out loud. She says, "Damon." He says, "Hey." The one-word response deployed as a shield, the way Damon deploys brevity when he is managing the distance between what he is feeling and what he is prepared to show. She says, "I need to say something." He says, "Elena, you just transitioned. You don't have to, because you're going to spend the next several months hoping, and I can't let you do that." The face becomes the controlled version. She watches him do it. The specific reorganization of his expression into something managed and opaque, and she feels the weight of what she is about to give him as a genuine thing. Not as guilt, not as performance of guilt, but as the real understanding that the person across from her built something around a hope, and she is the person who has to tell him the building has no foundation. She says, "I will always care about you. That's not something that's going to change, and I'm not saying it to soften what comes next. It's true, and you deserve to hear true things from me." She says, "You saved me. You challenged me in ways I needed to be challenged. You made me feel things that surprised me and that I didn't always know what to do with." She says, "But what I feel for Stefan is not confusion. It's not obligation. It's not the result of anything external." She says, "I loved him before I knew what he was. I love him now, knowing everything he is. I love him as a human, and I love him as a vampire, and I am going to love him for as long as I exist." Silence. Her vampire hearing picks up the specific change in his heartbeat, the rate of it, the way it responds to what she's saying before his face does. She says, "I'm sorry, but you have to let me go." He looks at her for a long moment. 3 seconds. 4. His jaw doing the thing it does when he is holding something in, the slight tension that has always been the tell he thinks nobody notices. He says, 150 years. She says, "I know." He says, "And you're telling me it was always him." "I'm sorry, that's true, but it is." He looks at Stefan. Stefan holds the look without flinching, without the apology that would have been condescending, without the guilt that would have been performative. Stefan holds the look the way you hold a look when you understand what it cost. Damon sets the glass down with a precision that says everything about what containing himself is requiring. He says, "Congratulations," and he leaves. She listens to his heartbeat move through the house and out the door, and she holds the weight of it. Stefan says, "I should." She says, "Give him tonight." He looks at her. She says, "He needs to be angry and alone with it. Tomorrow we figure out the rest." Stefan looks at the doorway. He says, "He loves you." She says, "I know. And that's real, and it matters, and I'm not pretending it doesn't. But Damon Salvatore loving me isn't a reason to love him back. It's something true I have to carry without being able to fix." Stefan turns back to her. He looks at her the way he looks at her when she has said something that reaches him below the surface. He says, "You're different." She says, "It's extraordinary." His heartbeat tells her the rest. The woods at 3 a.m. She finds out what her body can do. The speed arrives not as effort, but as permission, the removal of a governor she didn't know was installed. her muscles operating at a ceiling she has never been able to access. She runs through the Salvatore property's tree line, and the trees become a blur, and the ground disappears from under her in a way that feels nothing like falling. It feels like the opposite of falling. It feels like the specific physical sensation of a constraint being lifted. She laughs. The sound comes out of her before she decides to make it. Full, unplanned, nothing performed about it. The laugh of a system discovering it has more capacity than it was allocated. Stefan materializes beside her. He has been giving her space to discover things, appearing when she turns around, present without crowding. She has noticed this, filed it. She says, "How long does this stay this good?" He says, "The running? Always." She says, "Everything?" She says, "Show me the feeding." He does. The lesson is patient and deliberate, and nothing like what she had been prepared for by everything she had absorbed about vampires and 4 years of proximity to them. Stefan's philosophy arrives before the practice. He explains the reasoning, treats the explanation as something she is owed rather than something she needs to be managed through. He does not speak to her as if she is in danger of herself. He speaks to her as if she is a person making choices with full information. She says, "You're treating me like a partner." He says, "You didn't do that when I was human." He pauses. He says, "I know." She says, "Because you were human and the world we were in was trying to kill you, and I spent most of my energy trying to stand between you and it, instead of handing you the tools to handle it yourself." She says, "I know, I'm sorry." She says, "Don't be sorry, just don't do it again." He says, "I won't. The hunt takes 40 minutes. She misses twice." He doesn't comment on the misses. He repositions and waits, and when she succeeds and the craving opens and she understands for the first time what it actually is, not the abstract concept she has been carrying around, but the concrete physical reality of it, she also understands immediately why the discipline matters. The craving is not a metaphor. It is a signal, specific and insistent. And the only thing between the signal and the action is the choice. She pulls back, sits back on her heels in the forest, focuses outward, on his heartbeat, on the specific sound of the trees, on the distance between herself and the nearest human in range. Lets the signal subside, he says. That's the work. She says, "Every time?" He says, "And you've been doing it for 160 years? He says, "I'm not going to have significant interruptions." He says, "That's the goal. It's a decision." He looks at her. His heartbeat does the thing she is learning to recognize. He says, "Come here." She does. Caroline arrives at 8 in the morning. Elena tracks her before the door opens. Footstep pattern on the porch, specific rhythm of Caroline's approach, which has always had a particular purposeful quality. The heartbeat that Elena has known since middle school and can now locate with a precision that would have been impossible 24 hours ago. Caroline stands in the doorway and looks at her. A long moment, the specific look of someone running an assessment, reading the difference, cataloging what has changed and what hasn't. Caroline says, "You look like you." Elena says, "I feel like me. More me, actually." It levels out a little. The first few weeks, everything is very loud. Elena says, "How did you handle it?" "Then I had some good teachers." Another pause, this one doing the work of asking a different question. Is Damon here? She has known about the configuration of this situation, has been watching it with the specific frustrated attention of someone who cares about all three people and can see what none of them can see about their own situation. The look on her face right now is the look of someone who already knew how this was going to go and is processing the confirmation. She says, "How did he take it?" Elena says, "He was controlled about it," which was harder to watch. Caroline says, "He'll be angry later." That's how Damon works. The controlled part is the first layer. Elena says, "I know." She brought blood bags from the hospital supply she has been carefully maintaining since her own transition. She puts them on the counter without making it a gesture, without the weight of performance around it. Just a practical thing done practically. She says, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Elena says, "Always." Caroline says, "Your eyes are different." Elena says, "Not the color. There's something darker in them." Elena says, "The amplification, it's not just the love it amplified, all of it, the protectiveness, the edge underneath the compassion." Caroline looks at her. She says, "Are you scared of it?" "I'm watchful of it." Caroline says, "That's the right answer." She pours herself a coffee. She sits down across from Elena at the kitchen table. They have been sitting across from each other at kitchen tables since they were 8 years old, And the specific geometry of it, the specific familiar comfort of it, arrives as a sensation that Elena had not anticipated, the way it feels to have a piece of your before life still intact. Caroline says, Bonnie's worried. Elena says, I know. Caroline says, she's going to need time. Elena says, what about Matt? Elena says, I'll go to him today, the human version. Elena says, he's allowed to. Caroline looks at her. She says, you're handling this better than I did. That lands. Caroline says, no, I didn't. Matt is at the grill. Elena tracks him from the parking lot, his heartbeat placing him behind the bar. The specific rhythm of someone running on routine, because routine is the only available structure when everything else has reorganized itself around a loss. She stands outside for a moment and runs the assessment she has been running since she woke up. Who does she owe honesty to? What does honesty look like for each of them? Where does care require uncomfortable truth rather than managed comfort? Matt requires uncomfortable truth. She goes in, he sees her immediately. He stops moving behind the bar. His heartbeat registers the change she expected. Not fear, not anger. The specific quality of grief that is grief without a target. Grief that is simply the response to an absence. The human Elena, the one he grew up with. The one he had feelings for before any of this started, before the supernatural world absorbed everyone in it. He says, you look the same. She says, no. He says, I keep thinking about the bridge, about what I should have done differently. Please hear that. He says, if I'd gotten you out faster. She says, Matt. His heartbeat responds to his name. I died. That was the outcome of that night. I died and Stefan saved me and I'm here. That's the whole story. He says, the whole story is that there's a version of you I'm never going to know. She says, you know this version. He says, I don't know how to. She says, the same way you knew every other version, by being here, by having conversations, by being Matt Donovan, who has always been the most decent person in any room. His eyes doing the thing human eyes do when they are processing something they cannot fully receive. The slight unfocus of looking at the surface of something too large to look through. He says, are you happy? She says, yes. He says, because of Stefan. She says, because of everything. Because I'm not afraid anymore. Because I'm strong and I'm with the person I want to be with. And I'm going to figure out how to live in this world correctly. She says, but yes, partly because of Stefan. He picks up a glass and a cloth and starts polishing it. The Matt Donovan method of moving forward. Hands occupied, body in motion. He says, come back tomorrow. I'll make you a milkshake. She says, I can't eat. He says, I know. Caroline gave me a list. He almost smiles. It won't have anything human in it. She looks at him. At this person she has known her whole life doing the specific work of adapting to a reality he didn't ask for. She says, you're the best person I know. He's having a bad week. Damon's bad week is visible from everywhere. He does not come back to the boarding house the first night. The second morning, Stefan tracks him to the grill and stands in the doorway and looks at his brother sitting at the end of the bar, with a specific architecture of someone who has been there for a while and does not intend to leave, and does not want company. Stefan sits down next to him anyway. Damon says without looking up, I don't want a speech. Stefan says, I'm not here to give one. Damon says, then what do you want? Stefan says, a drink. He flags the bartender. He waits for the bourbon. He sits beside his brother and lets the silence be what it needs to be. Not comfortable, not awkward, just the specific weight of two brothers sitting with something enormous and not pretending it is smaller. Damon says, finally, 150 years. Stefan says, I know. Damon says, I organized my entire existence around this, around her. He turns the glass in his hands. His voice has the specific controlled quality of someone who has been containing something for 48 hours and is managing the release rate. And then she's right there and she says your name and he stops. He drinks. He says, you know the worst part? She was right. Everything she said was right. I couldn't argue with a single word of it. Stefan says, she's honest. She's always been honest. Damon says, it would be easier if she wasn't. He sets the glass down. He looks at his brother for the first time. His face doing the thing it does when he has made a decision he is not comfortable with, but that has presented itself as the only available option. He says, there's a vampire hunter in town. Stefan blinks. Damon says, Connor Jordan arrived 2 days ago. He's not counsel. He's something else. There's a mark on his hand I've never seen before, and I've seen everything. Stefan looks at his brother, at the redirect, at the specific Damon Salvatore method of converting grief into momentum, pointing himself at a problem because forward motion is the only available alternative to what is happening when he stands still. He says, "Tell me what you know." Damon says, "Come to the boarding house tomorrow. I'll show you everything." He pauses. He says, "Elena will want to be part of this." Stefan says, "Yes, she can handle herself. Don't keep her off the work." Stefan says, "I won't." Damon says, "Good." He turns back to his drink. He says, "Go home, Stefan." Stands. He says, "Damon, or I will be. Just not tonight." Stefan leaves. Damon sits alone at the bar and looks at the bourbon spreading patterns in the glass and thinks about the specific quality of hearing your name said by someone who then says a different name. About the 5 seconds that ended 150 years. About the look on Elena's face when she said it, the absence of apology and the certainty, the flatness of someone stating a result rather than delivering a verdict, the specific honesty of someone who has stopped managing you. He thinks she wasn't wrong. He thinks she was never wrong about this. He thinks 150 years and all I have to show for it is being the brother who lost. Then he thinks about Connor Jordan and the mark he has never seen. And he calls the bartender and he turns his attention toward the problem. Because Damon Salvatore, when the thing he was organized around becomes unavailable, finds something else to organize around. The Connor situation develops faster than any of them account for. Elena tracks him first, her new senses picking up the specific quality of threat assessment attention that professionals deploy in public spaces, the way he clocks the room differently than civilians do, the pattern of his gaze that identifies exits and potential targets before it notices anything else. She is at the grill on Tuesday afternoon, and Connor Jordan is at a table across the room, and within 60 seconds she has identified that he is not a tourist and not a resident, and not any category of person she has encountered in. Mystic Falls before. She texts Stefan, she texts Damon separately. Both of them arrive within 15 minutes. She watches them process the same information she processed and reach the same conclusion on different timelines. Stefan methodically, Damon faster, both of them landing in the same place. Connor is dangerous. Connor knows what they are. Connor has a plan. The mark on his hand, which Damon photographs from across the room without Connor noticing, is something none of them recognize. Damon says, in the parking lot, the three of them standing in the specific geometry of people who have just been reminded that their personal situation is irrelevant to external threats. I've been alive for 170 years, and I've never seen that marking, which means either it's recent or it's been hidden for a reason. Elena says, both of those are bad options. Damon says, both of those are correct. He looks at her the way he is going to keep looking at her for a while, with the specific quality of someone who has acknowledged something they cannot change, but has not yet figured out how to recalibrate around it. She receives this without flinching. She owes him honesty, not the management of his process. She says, "What do we do?" Damon says, "Gather information before we act. We don't know enough yet." Stefan says, "Agreed." Elena says, "Then we do it together." The feeding rhythm establishes itself by the end of the first week. Morning. Animal blood from the supply Stefan keeps in the boarding house, taken with the discipline that is already becoming habit. Noon. Blood bags when available. The hospital supply Caroline has been cultivating the specific practicality of a system that works. Evening. The woods, if the urge requires more active management, the hunt is both feeding and training. She is building the control the way you build anything, incrementally through repetition, through the specific accumulation of individual instances of choosing the right thing, until choosing the right thing becomes the structural default rather than the effort. Stefan watches this process with an attention she has become attuned to. Not monitoring, witnessing. There is a difference and she can feel it. Monitoring is surveillance. Witnessing is presence. He is present for the building of her control the way he is present for everything she is doing in this first week. Available without crowding, engaged without directing. She says one evening, "You're not worried about me." He says, "Should I be?" She says, "Most people are." He says, "Most people are watching the vampire. I'm watching you. You're handling it." She says, "What if I stop handling it?" He says, "Then I'll be here for that too." She says, "That's not a plan." He says, "It's the only plan that works." She sits with that. She finds that she believes him, which is different from finding the statement intellectually sound. Believing him as a physical thing a settling of something in her chest that the transition has made more legible. The amplification clarifying not just love, but trust, not just protectiveness, but the specific knowledge of where that protectiveness is warranted. She says, "Is it like this for all vampires?" The clarity? He says, "No. Some people the transition makes louder, noisier. The clarity is you." She says, "How do you know?" He says, "Because I've known you for 2 years as a human, and this is you turned up, not changed. Everything that was true about you is just truer." She considers this. She says, "Especially those." She says, "That should scare me." He says, "Does it?" She says, "No." He says, "I know." His heartbeat tells her what his face is trying not to show, the specific joy of a person who has been waiting to be with someone as an equal, and has arrived at that thing and is trying not to let the arriving of it be visible, because visibility feels like pressing on something that might not. Be able to hold the pressure. She lets him not show it. She can hear his heartbeat. She already knows. Bonnie comes on Thursday. Elena hears her on the front walk before the doorbell rings. The specific rhythm of Bonnie Bennett's footstep, which has been constant since 3rd grade. The heartbeat underneath the surface-level competence that has always been Bonnie's primary mode of presentation. The heartbeat elevated. The heartbeat of someone doing a hard thing they have decided to do. Elena opens the door before Bonnie knocks. Bonnie looks at her. The assessment runs. Elena can track it, can see the specific sequence of what Bonnie is cataloging, the differences registered and filed. Bonnie has been doing this assessment in various forms for 4 years. Elena has watched Bonnie look at vampires with the specific attention of someone keeping a record of everything the supernatural world costs them. Bonnie says, "Your eyes are different. There's something darker in them." Elena says, "Yes." Bonnie says, "Are you still you?" Elena says, "More me than I've been since my parents died." Bonnie looks at her for a long moment. Elena does not fill the silence. She has learned, over 4 years of this friendship, that filling Bonnie's silences is a mistake. Bonnie's silences are working silences, and interrupting them produces worse outcomes than waiting produces. Bonnie says, "I need to say something, and I need you to not take it wrong." Elena says, "Say it." Bonnie says, "I'm scared of you." Elena says, "Okay." Bonnie says, "Not of you specifically, of what you are now, of what you're capable of the part of you that the transition amplified that I've always been a little scared of even when you were human." Elena says, "The part that would burn the world down for the people I love." "Yes." Bonnie says, "You said more you than you've been since your parents died." Elena says, "Yes." Bonnie says, "That worries me, because the you since your parents died has been managing grief by protecting everyone around her to the point of self-destruction. If that gets amplified," Elena says, "I know." Bonnie says, "Do you?" Elena says, "It's the first thing I thought about when I understood what the amplification was, that the protectiveness was going to get louder, that the edge underneath the compassion was going to sharpen." She looks at her best friend. "I'm watchful of it. I'm not pretending it isn't there." Bonnie says, "I'm going to need time." Elena says, "I know." Bonnie says, "I'm going to need you to give me time without being hurt that I need it." Elena says, "Done. And I'm going to need you to be honest with me when the dark parts get loud. Not managed honest. Actually honest." The specific geometry of two people who have been sitting next to each other since childhood, recalibrated around a new reality, finding that the fundamental shape of the thing still holds. Bonnie says, "Damon." Elena says, "Yes." Bonnie says, "How is he?" Elena says, "Redirecting. He found a vampire hunter in town." Bonnie says, "It's his way of surviving. There's a difference." Bonnie says, "Will he be okay?" Elena says, "Eventually, he's Damon." Bonnie says, "That's not actually reassuring." Elena says, "I know, but it's true." The Connor situation becomes unavoidable the following week. Connor Jordan is methodical in the specific way that professionals are methodical. No wasted motion, no unnecessary exposure, working from intelligence before committing to action. He has been in Mystic Falls for 8 days, and in that time he has mapped the supernatural landscape with a precision that makes it clear he arrived with resources and purpose. Elena is the one who spots the surveillance pattern first. She has been tracking him with the passive precision her new senses make automatic, his heartbeat appearing in various locations across Mystic Falls. The pattern of those appearances forming a map that, when she lays it over what she knows about the town, identifies 2 things: where he's been, and where he's going. She brings it to Stefan and Damon at the boarding house. She lays it out at the table, the timing, the locations, the pattern she has assembled from 10 days of passive observation. She watches them run the same analysis she ran, reach the same conclusions, clock the same threat assessment. Damon says, "He's been here before. Their movement patterns are different. This is something else." Damon says, "The mark on his hand." He pulls up the photo he took. "I've sent this to every contact I have. Nobody recognizes it." Elena says, "Then we need to get the mark itself." Stefan says, "We need to understand what we're dealing with before we do anything." Elena says, "Agreed." She looks at both of them. The specific configuration of this conversation, Stefan on her left, Damon across the table, the three of them working a problem together without the weight of the personal situation pressing down on every word, has a quality she wants to note and doesn't, because noting it would be pressing on the thing that cannot hold pressure yet. She says, "What do we know about vampire hunters, beyond the council?" Damon says, "Old orders. The Brotherhood of the Five. I've heard the name. Ancient hunters with specific supernatural marks. Hunters who were created, not trained." Elena says, "Created how?" Damon says, "That's what we need to find out." Stefan says, "Professor Shane at Whitmore College, he's been collecting supernatural history for decades. If the Brotherhood of the Five is real and documented, he'll know it." Damon says, "I don't trust Shane." Stefan says, "You don't trust anyone." Damon says, "Correct. It's a very effective policy. We gather information. We don't act until we know what we're acting against." She looks at Damon. "Can you get an introduction?" "Then get it." Something moves across Damon's face that is too fast to fully read. Something at the intersection of old habit and new reality. The specific look of someone who has been the one who does things and is now doing things in a reorganized context that he is still learning to navigate. He says, "Okay." He says it to the table rather than to her directly. She lets that stand. She is giving him the space to recalibrate, without making the recalibration a visible thing he has to perform in front of her. She owes him that much. Stefan's hand finds hers under the table. She does not look at him. She does not need to. His heartbeat tells her everything. The first night, nothing tries to kill any of them. She goes to the roof of the boarding house. She has been doing this since she was human. The specific need for open sky when everything indoors feels like it is pressing in. The boarding house roof is accessible from the third-floor window, and she has climbed it before, and the fact of her body making the climb differently now, faster, with a precision that requires almost no effort, is one of the 100 small recalibrations of the week. She sits at the roof's peak and extends her hearing outward. The town. She can hear the town. Not all of it. She is still learning to filter. Still learning which signals to attend to and which to let fall into background noise. But enough of it. The specific sounds of Mystic Falls doing what Mystic Falls does at 1 a.m, which is mostly sleep, occasionally trouble. She can hear Stefan downstairs, his heartbeat in the specific pattern of deep sleep, the rhythm she has been learning to read the way she has been learning to read all of it. She can hear, further away, Damon's heartbeat, not in the boarding house, somewhere across town. Still elevated, still carrying the specific signature of someone running from standing still. She can hear Caroline, 2 blocks north, the heartbeat she has known for 15 years, familiar, even recalibrated through this new precision. She can hear Bonnie, 3 blocks east, the heartbeat of someone working late. Probably research, probably supernatural, probably something she will bring to Elena when she is ready. She sits with all of it, the specific weight of a town that has been her whole life, and that she can now hear at a resolution she was never able to access before. The darkness is there. She can feel it at the edge of what she is, the protectiveness with its sharp edge, the part that would burn the world down. She does not push it away. She sits with it the way you sit with something that is genuinely part of you, with the specific watchfulness of someone who knows the thing is there and has decided to be in charge of it rather than pretending it isn't. She is not afraid. That is still the most surprising thing. That the thing she had most feared about this, losing herself, losing the warmth, losing the specific quality of being Elena Gilbert that she had always understood as her fundamental characteristic, did not happen. The transition did not take her. It amplified her, including the parts she is watchful of. She is more herself than she has been since the bridge. She thinks, this is what I am now. She thinks, okay. She thinks, now let's get to work. Connor Jordan makes his first move on a Wednesday. Elena hears it before she sees it. the specific shift in the town's ambient sound pattern that her new senses have been mapping for 2 weeks. The way Mystic Falls has a baseline frequency and deviation from that frequency registers before her conscious mind processes why. Something off. Something wrong. Her body responds before her brain catches up, already moving toward the door before she has formulated the decision to move. This is the thing about being a vampire that nobody told her. Not the feeding, not the speed, not the specific overwhelming clarity of senses running at a register she had no previous access to. The thing nobody told her is that the threat response system installs itself before you consent to it. She does not decide to move toward danger. She moves and then understands she has moved. She finds the situation 3 blocks from the boarding house. Connor has a vampire pinned against a wall. Not someone she knows. A mid-level Mystic Falls resident she has seen at the grill without ever learning his name. And the stake in Connor's hand is positioned with the specific precision of someone who does not miss. She tracks the scene in the fraction of a second before she acts. Connor's stance, his heartbeat which runs at a rate that says this is not his first time, the distance between the stake and the vampire's chest, the angle of approach that gives her the best odds of intervention without putting the pinned vampire in additional danger. She moves. The intervening takes 2 seconds. She separates Connor from the vampire with enough force to send him back 6 feet. Plants herself between them, tracks his recovery. He comes up fast. Faster than a human should. The mark on his hand catching the streetlight, and she looks at him and he looks at her, and something passes between them that is not speech, but is information. He knows what she is. Neither of them moves. He says, "You're one of them." That tells her more than his face does. He is not surprised. He is not afraid. He is running an assessment that has already been running before this moment. She is a new variable in a calculation he has been performing for days. He says, "You should stay out of this." She says, "That's not going to happen." He looks at her for 3 more seconds. Then he leaves, deliberately, unhurried, the exit of someone who has made a strategic decision rather than a retreat. He rounds the corner, and she tracks his heartbeat moving away with the controlled pace of a person who was never running in the first place. She stands in the street. The vampire she saved is already gone. She doesn't look for him. She calls Stefan. Damon gets there first. She is back at the boarding house by the time he arrives, and she can hear from his heartbeat before he enters that he has already been working this problem. The rate of it, the specific signature of Damon Salvatore running on something other than grief for the first time in 2 weeks. The redirect that Stefan offered him has been doing its work. He comes in and she reads the room's configuration before he speaks. The data he has accumulated since the Mark photograph, the contacts he has reached, the specific shape of what he knows versus what he needs. He says, "Tell me exactly what you saw." She tells him. She tells it the way her new mind retains things, precise, sequenced, nothing softened, the stance, the heartbeat, the mark catching the light, the specific quality of someone who was not surprised by anything she did. Damon's face does the thing it does when a piece of information connects to something he has already been turning over. He says, "He knew you were a vampire before you intervened." She says, "Yes." He says, "Which means he's been watching you." She says, "Or he has information about who lives in this town that he brought with him." Brotherhood of the Five. He says it like a confirmation of something he has been building toward. "I got something back from one of my older contacts. A hunter lineage that dates back to the 12th century. 5 hunters, each marked. The mark isn't just identification, it's a map. Kill enough vampires, the mark expands. Complete the map and it reveals the location of something. Elena says, "Of what?" Elena, Damon, the specific energy of 2 people who have already been building towards something, and he joins it without requesting the update, letting Elena provide it, which she does in the same precise way she provided it to Damon. Stefan says, Shane knows about this. The meeting with Professor Shane happens on Friday. She spends the 48 hours between Connor's wall pinning and the Whitmore meeting running parallel tracks. The surface track, normal. Classes, the grill, the specific performance of a life proceeding on schedule that everyone in Mystic Falls who doesn't know the supernatural landscape requires from the people inside it. The internal track, continuous assessment. Every piece of information she has accumulated about Connor Jordan laid against every piece she has accumulated about the Brotherhood of the Five. The map, the mark, the thing the mark supposedly leads to. Shane is at Whitmore College, and Shane knows things, and the question is what Shane wants in exchange for knowing them. She says this to Stefan the night before the meeting. They are in his room, her room now. The migration having happened gradually over the first 2 weeks of her transition, with the specific unforced quality of a thing that was always going to happen. And she is lying on her back looking at the ceiling and running the Shane calculation. She says, he's going to want something. Stefan says, yes. She says, people who know specific obscure things about specific supernatural history don't share that knowledge without an agenda attached. So we go in knowing he has an agenda, and we try to figure out what the agenda is before we give him anything he can use. Stefan says, Damon will push too fast. That's actually useful here. He pushes, Shane responds to the push, we watch the response. Stefan is quiet for a moment. She can hear his heartbeat, the specific rhythm of him turning something over. He says, you're using Damon. She says, I'm using Damon's natural tendency to be direct, to produce information we couldn't produce by being careful. That's not the same thing. He says, he won't like it if he finds out. She says, he won't find out because it will work and there won't be anything to find out. He says, you're different in the way you think about strategy. She says, the amplification. He says, yes. She says, does that bother you? He says, no. His heartbeat. It makes me feel less alone. She turns her head to look at him. He is looking at the ceiling. She says, you've been the strategic one for 160 years. He says, I've been the one trying not to be. There's a difference. She says, you don't have to try not to be anything with me. His heartbeat does the thing it does. She already knows what it means. She stops looking at the ceiling. Shane performs exactly as she anticipated. He has the specific quality of a man who knows more than he is saying and wants to be asked the right questions so he can demonstrate how much he knows. She tracks this from the first 30 seconds of the meeting. The way his attention moves across the 4 of them, the way he files each of them in a category, the way his answers arrive slightly too quickly to be unprepared. He is performing ignorance about parts of this. He already knows they are here about Connor. She lets Damon push. He does, asking direct questions at a pace that most people find uncomfortable, not giving Shane the space to redirect before the next question lands. Shane responds to this by giving just enough to seem helpful while retaining the architecture of what he actually knows. She watches the shape of what he's retaining. She asks, at the specific moment when Shane has finished deflecting Damon's third question and is experiencing the brief relaxation of someone who thinks they have successfully managed the conversation. What does the map lead to? Shane's heartbeat spikes. Fraction of a second. She would not have caught it human. He says, according to legend, a cure. And there it is. The word lands in the room with the weight of something that has been building pressure behind a door and has now opened. She tracks the effect of it across everyone in the room. Stefan's specific stillness, the kind that arrives when a piece of information reconfigures what he thought he was working on. Damon's heartbeat doing the thing it does when a new variable enters his calculation. Bonnie's sharp intake of breath. She says, a cure for vampirism. Shane says, 1 dose for 1 person. She says, and you know where it is. That smile, the specific smile of someone who has arrived at the part of the conversation they were steering toward. She files the smile. She files everything. The car ride back to Mystic Falls runs on 4 separate internal conversations that nobody is having out loud. She can hear all of them. Stefan's heartbeat doing the specific thing that means he is running a version of the conversation in his head that he will present to her later, after he has organized it. Damon's heartbeat doing what Damon's heartbeat does when a new variable has been introduced that has personal implications he is processing at the same time as strategic ones. Bonnie's heartbeat carrying a weight that arrived the moment Shane said cure, a weight that has Graham's name in it, she is almost certain. She does not perform being unaware of any of this. She says, we should talk about what we're actually doing with this information before the next thing happens. Stefan says, the cure. The specific silence of a car full of people who are thinking the same thing from different angles and haven't decided how to say it. Damon says, from the front seat without turning around, who takes it? Or at least, nobody takes it without choosing to. That's the question we need to answer. He says, you don't want it. She says, Stefan doesn't want you to have it. She says, Stefan doesn't get to want or not want that. It's not his decision. She feels Stefan look at her. She says to Stefan, I mean that. I'm not taking the cure because I don't want to. Not because you don't want me to. Those are different things and the difference matters. Stefan says, I know. She says, good. Damon says, then why are we here? She says, because Klaus is going to hear about this. Because a cure for vampirism, one dose, in the hands of a 1,000-year-old original who needs hybrid blood to build his army, that's a threat calculation we need to be ahead of. He says, she's right. Stefan says, I know she is. Damon says, so we keep Klaus away from the cure, including ourselves. She looks at Bonnie in her peripheral vision. Bonnie, what did Shane offer you? Bonnie's heartbeat, she says. How did you know he offered me something? Elena says, your face when he said cure. Bonnie says, he said I could see grams. The weight of that arrives in the car and nobody speaks for a moment. Elena says, he's using that to move you toward something. He knows what he's doing. Bonnie says, I know. Elena says, and you're still going to think about it. Bonnie says, yes. Elena says, I know. She says, that's why I need you to tell me when he asks for something in exchange. Before you give it, Bonnie looks at her, the assessment, the specific Bonnie Bennett assessment that has been running on Elena for 4 years, and that Elena has learned to read, the way it measures not what is being said, but whether the person saying it can be trusted with the full weight of the situation. Bonnie says, okay. Jeremy has to kill vampires. This is the part she sits with longest. The hunter's mark on his hand, transferred from Connor, the map that expands with each kill, the path to the cure running directly through her 17-year-old brother's willingness to become a killer. She says this to Stefan at the boarding house kitchen table the night after the Shane meeting. She says it flat and clear, the way her new mind presents problems. Not managed, not softened, just the situation as it actually is. She says, my brother has to kill things. Stefan says, yes. She says, and every time he kills one, the mark grows. And the mark growing is painful. And he is 17. And if we are going to use the cure to keep it from Klaus, which requires the mark to be completed, then we are asking my brother to go through something that is going to change him. Stefan says, yes. She says, this is why you don't want to do this. I wanted to think through what we're actually asking before I brought it to you. She looks at him. She says, you were protecting me from information. He says, I was trying to. She says, you promised me you wouldn't do that. He says, I know. I'm sorry. She says, I need all the information, even the information that's going to be hard to hold, especially that information, because I can hold it. I'm not the person who needed to be shielded from it. He says, I know that now. You just, he says, old habits. She says, break them. He says, I'm trying. She lets that sit. Then she says, tell me what you know about training Jeremy. He says, I can work with him. I know what it takes to fight and survive in this world. If he's going to do this, I want him doing it with everything he needs to do it safely. She says, he doesn't get to do it alone. He says, no. She says, he gets us. Both of us. Me and you, and Damon if we need him, and the whole apparatus. He says, agreed. She says, and when it's over, when the mark is complete and we have the cure and Klaus doesn't, Jeremy gets to decide what he does next. Not us. Him, he says, agreed. She says, good. She looks at the table. She says, I hate this. He says, I know. She says, I hate that loving people in this world means watching them have to become things they shouldn't have to become. He says, I know. She says, but I'm not going to stop loving them, even knowing the cost. His heartbeat, his hand on the table close to hers. She says, that got amplified too. He says, I know. The island is Shane's idea and the worst possible decision, and they make it anyway. She understands, boarding the transport, that the specific configuration of this expedition, Stefan, herself, Damon, Jeremy, Bonnie, Rebecca, has too many variables and too many competing agendas and not enough information about what is waiting on the other side of the crossing. She files this assessment and does not voice it, because voicing it changes nothing, and the alternative to going is leaving Jeremy to face whatever is on that island, without the people who will burn down anything that threatens him. She goes. The island itself registers as wrong from the moment she sets foot on it. Something in the supernatural atmosphere of it pressing against her new senses like a change in barometric pressure. The specific feeling of a place that has absorbed a significant amount of dark history and kept it. She tracks it without being able to identify it, notes it, files it. The separation happens faster than any plan accounts for. Shane, and she should have predicted this. She had predicted this, she had just not understood the specific mechanism. Has been moving pieces for weeks. His investment in this expedition is not academic. She understands this fully and with specific fury the moment she realizes the shape of what is happening. The expedition was always the delivery mechanism. They are being herded. She and Stefan are 300 meters from the cave entrance when Catherine appears. She does not announce herself. That would be Catherine's least likely move. She materializes from the tree line with the specific ease of someone who has been moving through this island for longer than any of them, and knows its geography better than their maps do. Elena's body responds before her mind does. The threat response system installed and running, placing her between Catherine and Stefan before she processes the decision. Catherine says, "That's sweet." Elena says, "What are you doing here?" Catherine says, "Same as you, the cure." She tilts her head, her eyes moving between Elena and Stefan. "Although you two seem less excited about it than I expected." "Oh right, no sire bond. You actually chose the boring Salvatore." "Obviously." Elena says, "You're working with Silas." Something flickers across Catherine's face. Not denial. Catherine doesn't waste energy on denials that aren't going to land. Something more calculated, she says. "I'm working with the situation. The situation involves Silas and a cure. I'm adjacent to both." Elena says, "You're the reason we're here." Catherine says, "You're welcome." Stefan's hand on Elena's arm. Not restraint. She reads the touch immediately, the specific pressure of it. Information. He is tracking something she isn't. She redirects her attention without taking her eyes off Catherine and locates it. Movement in the tree line to the north. A second presence, a heartbeat she does not recognize. She says, "Walk away, Catherine." Catherine says, "That's really not in my interest." Elena says, "I'm going to give you one more." Not toward Elena, toward the tree line, which was the tell. The second presence pulling her back in that direction, the coordination of two people who had choreographed this exit before it was needed. She is gone in 2 seconds. The second presence, whoever it was, gone with her. Elena stands in the clearing. She says, "She's working with someone we don't know," which means she's been here before or she has information about it. She says, "Which means she's been ahead of this the entire time." She reads it. She says, "You knew she was here before she appeared." He says, "I suspected. I didn't want to be right." She says, "Tell me when you suspect things." He says, "Elena, they arrived 20 seconds too late." She will run that calculation for a long time afterward. 20 seconds. The specific cost of 20 seconds when 20 seconds is the difference between being in the cave when Catherine arrives at Jeremy and not being in the cave. 20 seconds that she will replay with the specific merciless precision of a mind that retains everything at full resolution. She hears Jeremy's heartbeat stop before she sees him. The hearing of it is worse than the seeing would have been. She hears his heart, Jeremy's heart, which she has been tracking without deciding to since she transitioned, which has been the specific constant that her new senses organize themselves around because he is her brother, and her new senses protect what she loves before they do anything else. She hears his heart, and then she hears the absence of it. She is running before the processing completes. She comes around the corner of the cave, and Catherine is already gone, and Bonnie is already on her knees, and Jeremy is on the ground, and Damon is there, which means Damon saw it, which means it happened in front of people who could not stop it, and all of this arrives simultaneously in the first second after she enters the cave. She gets to him. She gets to the floor. Her hands finding him with the specific automated precision of her new body doing the thing it does when the person she loves is in danger before her mind has caught up. She says, "Jeremy," his name in her mouth with a voice she does not recognize as her own. Stefan's hands on her shoulders. His voice. "Elena, we have to," the word coming from the part of her that the transition amplified past the point of management. The fierce protectiveness, with its sharp edge. The part that would burn the world down. Right now that part is not burning anything. Right now that part is on the cave floor with her hands on her brother and saying no to the universe's verdict. She says, "Bonnie, bring him back." "I can't, the other side. It's sealed." She says, "Break the seal." Bonnie says, "Elena." She says, "Break it." Damon's voice. Elena, his heartbeat behind her. Elevated in the specific way that Damon's heartbeat elevates when he is about to say something true that he doesn't want to say. He's gone. The word gone arriving in her new mind with a precision that human grief never had. Every detail of this moment registering at full resolution. Jeremy's face, the temperature of the cave floor, the sound of Bonnie crying somewhere behind her, Stefan's hands still on her shoulders. The cure? Somewhere in this cave, the thing they came here for. She looks at the cure. She looks at her brother. She says nothing for a long time. The return to Mystic Falls happens in the specific gray of the aftermath of an impossible thing. Damon carries Jeremy. She understands, in the abstract, that this is happening. She processes it the way she is processing everything in the hours after the cave, as information that arrives and is filed and does not produce the response that the information should produce. A numbness that is not the humanity switch, not yet, just the specific overload of a system that has received too much input at too high a resolution. Stefan is beside her for all of it, not talking, not filling the silence with comfort, witnessing. She said once that there was a difference between witnessing and monitoring, and she was right, and he understood her, and this is him understanding her. Being present for the worst thing without trying to manage the worst thing. She sits in the car, and she does not look out the window. She tracks Jeremy's heartbeat involuntarily, as she has been tracking it for 2 weeks, and then she tracks its absence, which is worse than any sound she has heard since she transitioned. The specific frequency of a signal that was constant and is now permanently absent. She thinks, I was too late by 20 seconds. She thinks Catherine knew the timing. She thinks Catherine has been 2 steps ahead of everything. She thinks, and Jeremy is dead. Her hands are completely still in her lap. Her face is completely still. She can feel Stefan watching her with the specific attention of someone monitoring a structural element under load. She says, I'm not going to be okay for a while. He says, I know. She says, and then I'm going to figure out how to be okay again. He says, but right now I need you to let me not be okay without trying to fix it. He says, okay, she says, and I need you to stay. He says, always. Jeremy's funeral runs on the specific logic of Mystic Falls funerals, which is the logic of people who have lost enough to know the mechanics and have not lost the capacity to feel each loss as its own complete thing. Elena delivers the eulogy. She delivers it robotically. She knows this. She can hear it in her own voice, the flat precision of someone reading words from memory without the specific biological signals that give words emotional weight. Her eyes are present, and her mouth is moving, and the words are correct and accurate, and assembled from everything she actually feels about Jeremy, and none of that feeling is arriving in the delivery. Everyone can see it. She tracks this, too, the way her friends' faces respond to the specific quality of her voice, the recognition running through the group of people who know her well enough to identify when the sound of her is wrong. She stands at the grave after everyone leaves. She stands there without moving, the sun going across the sky and her not tracking it. The specific time-losing quality of standing in one place for too long arriving and not producing any instinct to change the situation. She hears Damon and Caroline talking somewhere behind the tree line. She tracks their heartbeats before she processes their words. Damon's voice low. She's going to flip the switch. I know the look. Caroline's voice, we can't let her. She'll become a monster. She stands at the grave. She thinks they're not wrong. She thinks, I can feel it. The specific weight of this grief through the amplification, the magnified version of what human grief would have been, the way vampire grief does not arrive on a human scale, but on a scale calibrated to the specific power of a supernatural being, feeling everything at maximum volume. She thinks, I cannot survive this. She thinks, so I will choose not to feel it. She goes home. Her room is full of Jeremy, the room that is hers, in the house that is hers, the space she has lived in for 18 years. Jeremy is everywhere in it, not as a ghost but as an accumulation. A photograph on the desk, a sweatshirt he left on the chair, his handwriting on a note she never threw away, the specific evidence of a person who existed in this space and who does not anymore. She sits on the edge of the bed. She holds the evidence, the photograph. She looks at his face. She thinks, I can't feel this. She thinks, so I choose nothing. The switch. She has known it was there since she transitioned, has been aware of its location the way you are aware of an emergency exit in a room you hope never to need. She has been monitoring it, being watchful of it, keeping the distance between herself and it. The distance is gone now. She makes the decision the way her new mind makes decisions. Directly, without the equivocation that used to characterize every choice she made, without the extended weighing process. She makes it, and then it is made. Her face goes blank. The light goes out of her eyes. The grief, the massive, vampirically amplified grief for Jeremy. The grief for her brother who died on the floor of a cave because of a plan that she was part of. The grief that would tear her apart at the resolution her new senses would force her to feel it, at is gone. Not processed. Gone. Set behind a door that is now closed. She sits on the edge of the bed and looks at the photograph. She feels nothing. She puts the photograph face down on the desk. She gets up. The grill is lit and full at 9 in the evening, and the specific noise of it, music, voices, the ambient frequency of people who are not grieving anything tonight, registers as the correct environment. She finds a seat at the bar. She orders a drink she does not need. She looks at the room with the flat assessment of someone who is no longer running the threat management calculation, but is running a different calculation entirely. A man at the end of the bar has been looking at her for 6 minutes. She knows this without having decided to track it. Her vampire sense is operating independently of the switch, the physical systems still running even when the emotional ones are offline. She says, without turning, "You can stop pretending you're not looking." He turns, mid-30s, human, the specific heartbeat of someone pleasantly surprised. He moves to the stool beside her. Stefan appears in the doorway. She hears his heartbeat before she sees him. Registers his specific frequency, elevated, which means he has been looking for her, which means he knows she left, which means the people who love her have been running the monitoring calculation she knew they would run. He clocks her at the bar. He clocks the man beside her. He crosses the room. He says, "Elena, let's go home." She says, "Home." She considers the word. "You mean that tomb of memories?" She says, "No thanks, I'm celebrating." He says, "Celebrating what?" "No more crying, no more pain." She looks at him with her new eyes, the flat eyes, the ones where the light is off. Just nothing, and it feels amazing. The way it responds to her face. She tracks this without the emotional weight she would have brought to it 12 hours ago. He is in pain. She files this as information. She turns back to the bar, Stefan's hand on her arm. She looks at his hand. She says, "Don't." She turns back to the man beside her. She can hear the man's heartbeat from 8 inches, the specific warmth of it, the specific pulse of it. She leans toward him with the specific precision of a system that has removed all internal resistance. Stefan moves, his body between hers and the man's, the specific movement of someone who has made a split-second decision about what the next 30 seconds require. He says he's done for the night, his eyes on the man, the compulsion landing clean and fast. "Go home." Elena says, "You're no fun." Stefan says, "Elena." She says, "The Ripper wouldn't have stopped me." Something moves across his face. She reads it the way she reads everything now, as information without the weight of care attached. She says, "Don't." "I'm not going to feel bad about saying it." He says, "I know you're not." She says, "I'm not her anymore, Stefan. She's gone. The version of me that was going to feel that in there," she gestures nowhere. "She's gone." He says, "She's not gone. She's hiding." The flat assessment. She says, "That's a very Stefan thing to say." He says, "It's true." She says, "I know." She says, "So what are you going to do?" He looks at her for a long moment. His heartbeat steady, the specific steadiness of a person who has made a decision and is not going to be moved from it. He says, "Whatever it takes." She says, "Probably." She stands. She says, "I'm going home, not because you want me to, because I want to." She says, "Don't follow me." She goes. She hears him pick up his phone behind her. She hears him dial. She hears the specific quality of 2 rings before the line picks up, and hears Stefan say, in the voice of someone who has arrived at the thing they were most afraid of, "I need your help. I can't do this alone." She hears, faint and compressed through the phone speaker, Damon's voice saying, "I'm on my way." Behind her, Mystic Falls does what it always does, continues, unaware, the ordinary machinery of a town that has been absorbing extraordinary things for long enough to metabolize them without stopping. She walks through it. She feels nothing. That is, for right now, enough. The no-humanity version of Elena Gilbert runs on a clarity that the humanity version never had access to. She understands this from the inside. The specific quality of her processing without the emotional weight, every calculation arriving clean, every variable assessed without the interference of care or grief, or the specific cost of loving people in a world that keeps taking them. She moves through Mystic Falls in the days after Jeremy's funeral with the flat efficiency of a system running at maximum capacity because the governor has been removed. She is extraordinarily effective. She is also, she understands without caring, extraordinarily dangerous. The reign of terror, she has heard them call it this. Her vampire hearing delivering their conversations to her whether she wants them or not. unfolds with the specific logic of a person who has removed the internal regulation system and retained all the capability. She feeds, she compels, she moves through Mystic Falls, attending parties and occupying bars and finding entertainment in the specific texture of a world she is no longer managing herself in relation to. She does not kill anyone. This is a choice, not an accident. Even without humanity, the calculation runs. Killing in Mystic Falls produces consequences that require energy to manage, and she has no interest in expending energy on consequences when the alternative is simply not creating them. She bites. She compels the memory away. She moves on. Stefan follows her everywhere. She is aware of this the way she is aware of all persistent environmental facts. Neutrally, filed, producing no particular response. His heartbeat tracking hers through the town. The specific pattern of someone maintaining surveillance at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene, and far enough to avoid triggering the confrontation he knows will not help his cause. She lets him follow. It costs her nothing and occasionally provides useful information about where everyone is. She thinks, on day 4 of the no humanity period, with the flat dispassion of a clear-running system, they are going to try to bring me back. She thinks, they will not be able to force it. She thinks, the only question is whether any of them are clever enough to figure out what would work. She does not think this with anxiety. She thinks it as a problem set she is watching from the outside. Caroline tries on day 5. She finds Elena at the boarding house. Elena has been sleeping there occasionally, not because she cares about the space, but because it is the most efficiently located base of operations. And she sits across from her with the specific body language of someone who has prepared this conversation and is going to deliver it regardless of how it lands. Caroline says, I know you can hear this as manipulation. I know you're going to catalog what I say for the emotional levers it's attempting to pull. I'm going to say it anyway. Elena says, okay, the specific frequency of genuine grief running underneath the controlled surface. You're the parts of you that are left when all the things that make you Elena are switched off. You're the chassis. I miss the person. Elena looks at her, the flat assessment. She says, that's actually a reasonable framing. Caroline says, it's not going to work. Caroline says, I know. She says, I'm going to try something else then. She says, you were always jealous that Stefan loved me. Now you can have him. I don't want him. Elena tracks the intent. Caroline is trying to provoke, trying to find a crack in the flat surface through the specific pressure of cruelty, trying to trigger any emotional response that can be worked into a larger breach. It would have worked on Caroline when Caroline had her humanity off. Caroline's no humanity version ran on vanity and competition, the amplified versions of the insecurities that human Caroline had managed with varying success. Elena's no humanity version does not run on those things. She says, that's not going to work either. The specific quality of someone who knew it wasn't going to work but had to try and is now sitting with the failure. Elena says, you're going to exhaust yourself doing this. Then why are you doing it? Caroline says, because you're my best friend and I would rather exhaust myself than stop trying. Elena looks at her. The flat assessment running, she says, that's a very Caroline thing. Caroline says, yes. Elena says, you should go. Elena hears her heartbeat move through the house and out the door. She hears Caroline cry in the driveway for approximately 40 seconds. She hears her stop. She hears her drive away. She feels nothing. She files it. Bonnie tries on day 7, and it is the one that comes closest. Not because of the magic. Bonnie arrives with a spell, and the spell does what every person with a technical understanding of the humanity switch already knows it will do, which is nothing. The switch is psychological. It cannot be flipped from outside. The magic finds no purchase. Elena sits in the cellar. She has been here since Damon and Stefan locked her in it 3 days ago, which she allowed because the cellar has vervain, and the vervain provides the framing of containment that keeps them from escalating to something more complicated. And she watches Bonnie perform the spell, and she says, I've been watching you do this for 4 years. I know when a spell isn't working. Bonnie lowers her hands. Her heartbeat is wrong. The specific elevation of someone who is managing grief about more than the immediate situation. Jeremy. Bonnie's heartbeat has been carrying Jeremy's name in it since the cave. Elena says, he's gone, Bonnie. Bonnie says, I know. Elena says, you did everything you could. Bonnie says, did I? Elena says, yes. Bonnie looks at her, something moving across her face that Elena tracks without the weight of caring about it. The specific quality of a person who is about to say something real, rather than something tactical. She says, "Do you know what Jeremy would say about this, about what you've done?" Elena says, "Don't." Bonnie says, "He'd be furious." Elena says, "Don't." Bonnie says, "Not because you flipped the switch, because you're using his death as the reason. He'd say you don't get to make his death into a shutdown. He'd say you owe it to him to feel it." Elena says, "Don't. Just different." Bonnie hears it. She goes still. Elena says, "Leave." The wall is stone, and the stone is old, and the specific texture of it registers with the full resolution her new senses provide, and she stares at it without seeing it. She is not thinking about Jeremy. She is not thinking about anything. She is being very careful not to think about anything. She sits there for a long time. Stefan enters the cellar on day 9. Alone. She hears Damon upstairs, his heartbeat placing him in the library, the specific rhythm of someone who is staying out of a plan they have disagreed with but have been overruled on. She had heard them argue about it. Damon's position? Lock her up, use physical pain, force the emotional response. Stefan's position? That approach does not work. It did not work when other people tried it on other vampires. It produces suffering without result. Stefan won the argument. She is curious about what he is going to do with the win. He sits down on the floor across from her. Not at the door, not in the doorway. On the floor, inside the space with her, at a distance that is close enough to be present and far enough to not be a threat. He sits with the specific quality of someone who has decided to be here for a long time and has made internal peace with that. He is holding something. She identifies it before she looks at it directly. The specific weight of a familiar object, the chain of it catching the cellar light. The necklace, the one he gave her in season 1. The one she kept through every version of them, through every complication, through everything the last 2 years have been. He does not hold it up. He does not use it as a visual prompt. He puts it on the floor between them, and then he looks at her. He says, "I'm not here to manipulate you." She says, "Then what are you here for?" He says, "To tell you a story." She says, "I'm going to tell it anyway." She says, "I'm going to tell it anyway." She says, "I'm going to tell it anyway." He says, "You were standing in the cemetery the night we first really talked. Not the encounters before that. The first time we actually talked. Just the two of us, with no agenda and no performance. You were standing at your parents' grave and I found you there. And I almost didn't say anything because I didn't have any words that would be adequate, and I knew they wouldn't be adequate." She says, "This isn't going to work." He says, "You were wearing a blue jacket, the one with the broken zipper that you kept meaning to fix and never did. And you were talking to them, out loud. And you heard me coming and you stopped and you had the specific look of someone who has been caught doing something private, and then you decided not to be embarrassed about it, and you kept talking. You said, 'Mom, this is Stefan. He's been very patient.' She is looking at the wall. She says, 'Stop.' He says, 'First dance, the founder's party. You were going with Matt as friends, and you were wearing white, and you looked at me across the room with the specific look of someone who has decided something but hasn't said it yet. And when we danced, you kept time perfectly, which surprised you, which surprised me that it surprised you. You said, 'I didn't know I could do this.' I said, 'What, dance?' You said, 'Feel normal about something.' She says, 'Stefan.' He says, 'First kiss. The boarding house. You were angry at me for something I'd done, and you'd come to tell me about the anger, and halfway through the sentence you stopped and you looked at me and you kissed me instead. You said afterward, 'That was not what I came here to do.' I said, 'I know.' You said, 'I don't apologize for it anyway.' I said, 'I know that too.'" Her hands, which have been completely still in her lap for 9 days, are not completely still anymore. She watches them the way you watch something happening to you from a slight remove. He says, "The island. Before everything, before Catherine and Jeremy in the cave, you and me in the dark outside the camp, and you said, 'Do you remember what you said?'" He says, "You said you'd choose me in every lifetime. You said it like you'd been thinking about saying it for a while and had decided this was the correct moment to say it and weren't going to qualify it or walk it back. You said it the way you say things that are facts." Her hands are shaking. She says, "Stop." He says, "That wasn't the humanity switch talking. That was you. The you that is not a performance and not a management and not what anyone else needed you to be. That was the you that exists underneath all the adaptations. The you that chose this, Elena. Not because of destiny or cosmic programming, or the specific gravity of two doppelgangers finding each other. You, with your own will and your own clarity and your own decision. He says, "That's the fact. Whether you feel it or not, it's real. It happened. You loved me and I loved you, and Jeremy was alive and everything costs less than it costs now. That's a fact. I'm not asking you to feel it. I'm just telling you it's real." He picks up the necklace. He holds it. He looks at it rather than at her. He says, "At the island, before everything, you were happy. I know you were because I could hear it. Not the performed kind. The real kind. The kind that doesn't know it's being observed. You were standing at the water and you thought I wasn't watching. And you were just there, in the moment, not managing anything," answered. He sets the necklace back down between them. He says, "I'm going to keep telling you true things until one of them reaches you, however long that takes." Silence. Her hands are shaking. She looks at the necklace on the floor between them, at the specific object with its specific history, the chain she wore for months, and the meaning of it, and the way meaning persists in objects even when you have closed the door on the feelings behind the meaning. She says, in a voice that sounds like hers and not like the flat version, "Stefan." He says, "Yes." She says, "I can't." The shaking spreading from her hands upward. "I can't feel it. I can't," he says. "You don't have to do anything." She says, "Jeremy is because you're the person who gets destroyed by things and rebuilds anyway. That's who you are. That's the fact." Not dramatic. Not the sudden flood she has seen in other people's humanity returns. Just a crack, the specific sound of a door that has been held shut beginning to give. The first evidence of pressure on the other side being greater than the resistance. Her face crumbles. The emotions return the way the report always said they would, all of them simultaneously. The full inventory of everything she has been refusing to feel for 9 days arriving at once in a wave that her vampire amplification delivers at the specific volume of the system that has been under compression. Jeremy, the cave, the 20 seconds, Catherine, her hands on the cave floor, the absence of his heartbeat. She collapses. Stefan catches her, his arms around her and her face against his chest and his heartbeat. That heartbeat she has been tracking since she transitioned. The most constant sound in her new life, steady against her ear while everything else is not steady at all. She cries for a long time. He holds her through all of it. He does not try to stop it or manage it or redirect it toward anything productive. He lets it be what it needs to be. The full weight of vampiric grief at maximum resolution, everything she compressed behind the door now occupying all available space. He says nothing. His heartbeat says everything. She wakes up in the cellar, and her humanity is back, and it feels like being hit by something massive and surviving it. Everything is loud again. The warmth is back, the specific quality of caring about things, about people, about the texture of the world, and it arrives not as relief, but as the specific pain of a system that has been anesthetized and is now registering everything it was not registering. Her hands, Stefan's face, the specific quality of the cellar light. She says, "I hurt everyone." "We understand." She says, "I hurt you." He says, "Elena." She says the Ripper line. "I said it because I knew it would land, and I didn't care how much it landed." Her voice steady. "I cared now. I'm sorry." He says, "That's not adequate." He says, "It doesn't need to be adequate right now. It just needs to be true." She looks at him, at his face in the cellar light. She says, "How long?" He says, 9 days. She says, "What did I do?" He tells her. Precisely not managing the telling. She listens to all of it and receives each piece with the specific quality of someone accepting an accounting of a debt they owe. She says, "Caroline." He says, "She's okay too. She's resilient." She says, "Matt." He says, "I kept her away from Matt." She says, "Good." A pause. "Damon." He says, "He helped." He says, "He helped." She says, "I need to tell him something." Damon is in the library with bourbon he has not been drinking. She hears this as she comes upstairs, the specific quality of someone sitting with a glass they have not touched, the absence of the consumption that would normally accompany the sitting. She stands in the library doorway, and he looks at her and she reads his face for the specific inventory. Relief, which he will not name. Grief for Jeremy, which he has been carrying in parallel with his own grief. The particular look of Damon Salvatore when someone he has invested in has been returned to something resembling okay. He says, "You're back." She says, "Good." She says, "Good." She says, "Elena." He says, "Elena." She says, "Elena." She says, "Thank you for helping Stefan, for not." She stops, reassembles, for being what you are even when it costs you. He says, "Don't make it precious." She almost smiles. She says, "I'm not." She says, "I mean it plainly. Thank you." He looks at her for a moment, his jaw doing the thing. He says, "You're welcome." He says it to the bourbon glass. She lets that stand. She says, "We have work to do." He says, "The cure, Silas, Catherine, all of it." He says, "I'll get Bonnie." She says, "I'll call Caroline." He stands. He looks at her. He says, "For what it's worth, the no-humanity version of you was formidable." She says, "I know." He says, "It's a little concerning how formidable." She says, "Okay." He moves toward the door. He says, without turning, "Jeremy would be glad you're back." The name arrives in her chest with the full weight of her restored humanity. She holds it. She does not let it take her down. She has felt the bottom of that grief, and she knows the bottom, and she knows she can hold the weight without being pulled all the way under. She says it to his back. He is already in the hall. Silas is free by the time they are ready to move. She processes this as the next operational fact. The cave's seal broken, the desiccation undone. The most powerful psychic being in supernatural history, loose in the world with a specific agenda and a specific ability to appear as any of them, to any of them. She runs the threat assessment with the full humanity restored version of her new mind. No longer the flat efficiency of the no-humanity calculation, but something more complete. The clarity plus the care running in parallel, producing results neither track could produce alone. Silas finds them before they find him. He comes as Stefan. She identifies the deception in approximately 4 seconds. The heartbeat is wrong, not dramatically. Just wrong in the specific way that something is wrong when it is perfect rather than imperfect. The uncanny valley of a replicated heartbeat, running at the rhythm of a man who is not experiencing the specific variables Stefan is currently experiencing. She says, "Where's Stefan?" The thing wearing Stefan's face says, "What do you mean? I'm right." She says, "Your heartbeat is wrong." The face shifts. Not all the way. Silas maintaining partial deception as a holding position. He looks at her with the specific curiosity of someone who has just encountered an unexpected variable. He says, "You can hear the difference." "Yes," he says. "That's a useful ability." She says, "Where is he?" He says, "Safe. I need something from you before I tell you where." She says, "No." He says, "That's not really. You're going to tell me where he is right now, or I'm going to call everyone in this building and we're going to make your first week of freedom extremely inconvenient." He looks at her. The assessment running, she can track it. The specific quality of someone recalibrating what they thought they were walking into. He says, "You're interesting." She says, "Where?" He says, "The doppelganger mythos is fascinating in practice. The universe does good work." She says, "Where is Stefan?" He says, "You should know that your love is cosmically supported. It's not just a feeling. It's written into the structure of reality. Your doppelganger and his have found each other across centuries. The universe considers it correct." She says, "That's the most manipulative reframing of a piece of information I've ever heard. Where is Stefan?" And then he is gone. The specific disappearance of a psychic who has decided a confrontation is not in his immediate interest. She is already moving. She finds Stefan in the quarry. He is alive. She hears his heartbeat from 200 meters. Elevated, stressed, but present. The specific rhythm of someone who has been in a difficult situation for a period of time and is managing it. She finds the tank underwater in approximately 6 minutes, gets it open in 2, and has Stefan above the surface in a total of 9. He coughs water. He looks at her. He says, "Silas." She says, "I know." He says, "How long was I?" He says, "You found me fast." She says, "Your heartbeat is the most constant sound in my life. I can find you anywhere." He looks at her. The specific quality of Stefan looking at her when something she has said has reached him below the surface. She says, "Can you stand?" He says, "Give me a minute." The Silas situation resolves through the specific combination of a plan and the people willing to execute it. She will not describe the resolution as clean. It is not clean. It is the particular organized chaos of their group when they are all operating with full information and full investment. The specific texture of Damon moving too fast and Bonnie's magic arriving at the critical moment, and Caroline's physical intervention and Stefan's strategic positioning, and herself running the whole map from the center of it. But it resolves. Silas contained. The doppelganger mythology laid out and examined and incorporated. The specific revelation of it, Stefan and Elena as the latest iteration of Silas and Amara. The universe repeatedly generating these two people and drawing them together across centuries, arriving in the aftermath of the resolution like a piece of information that has been waiting for the right moment. She sits with Stefan that evening, and she holds the revelation and turns it over. She says, "Was any of it real?" He says, "What do you mean?" She says, "If the universe is pushing us together, if it's been pushing versions of us together for centuries, was any of our choice actually choice?" He says, "What?" He says, "If the universe wanted me with the doppelganger, if it's written into the structure of reality, why did I spend 145 years not loving Catherine? She looks exactly like you. She was the first. Why didn't it work?" She thinks about this. He says, "Because the universe can create the conditions, it can put us in proximity, it can generate the pull, but it can't make us choose." He says, Silas chose obsession. He wanted to possess Amara, to own her, to anchor the universe to his specific desire for her. That's not love, that's control. He says, "What we have is different. Every day I choose this. Every day, with everything I know about what it costs and what it requires and what it's asked of both of us, I choose you." That's not the universe talking. That's me. She says, "What if the feeling is the universe and the choice is just us rationalizing it?" He says, "Then it's the most convincing rationalization in history, and I'm not interested in the alternative." The specific quality of Stefan Salvatore refusing to let the mystical override the personal. She says, "Destiny gave us a chance." He says, "We made it real. We chose partnership." He says, "Yes." She says, "I like that distinction." He says, "I know," his heartbeat. She says, "I can still hear the difference. Between yours and a copy, in case you were wondering." He says, "I was, actually." Damon finds her on the roof of the boarding house the night before graduation. She hears him coming, his specific footstep, his heartbeat, the rhythm of someone who has made a decision about a conversation and is delivering himself toward it with controlled forward momentum. She does not look up when he sits beside her. She gives him the space to arrive at whatever he came to say. He says, "I'm sorry," for treating it as a temporary misalignment rather than a real decision made by a real person who knew what she wanted. He says, "For making it about me." She looks at him, his profile against the Mystic Falls night sky, the specific quality of Damon Salvatore, being honest without the armor of sarcasm or performance to manage the vulnerability of it. She says, "I'm sorry I couldn't love you the way you needed." He says, "You loved me how you could. That has to be enough." He says, "Ask me again in a year." A pause. Right now it feels like the only available option, which might be the same thing. He says, "Elena." She says, "You saved me multiple times, not just from external things, from myself, from the no humanity version of myself." She says, "That matters." He says, "I know." She says, "I don't want you to disappear from my life because this didn't go the way you wanted." He says, "I'm not going anywhere." He says it in the flat tone that means it's true. "You're annoyingly important to me regardless of the configuration." She says, "Don't make it precious." She almost laughs. He looks at the sky. He says, "Silas, the doppelganger thing." She says, "Yes." He says, "I was fighting the universe." She says, "It sounds like..." He says, "Does it hurt less, knowing it was impossible from the beginning?" She thinks about this honestly. She says, "I don't know. Does it?" He says, "It hurts the same, but it feels less like my fault." He says, or his fault. He says it with the specific quality of something that cost him something to say. It was just the wrong configuration. The universe made a mistake in the sequencing. She says, "The universe doesn't make mistakes." He says, "Then it made a choice that served someone else's interests more than mine." She says, "I'm not asking for an apology. I'm describing a thing," he says. "I'm going to be okay. That's the part I want you to know. Not performing okay. Actually going to be okay." She says, "I believe you." He says, "Good." He stands. He looks down at her. He says, "For what it's worth, the version of you that chose him with that much clarity on the first day, that's the most Elena Gilbert thing you've ever done." She says, "It's an observation," he says, "Happy graduation." He goes back inside. She sits on the roof and listens to his heartbeat moving through the boarding house below her. She has been tracking it for 6 weeks the way she tracks all the heartbeats of the people she loves. Passively, continuously, the new system her vampire body installed and that she has stopped fighting. Damon's heartbeat, Stefan's heartbeat, Caroline's, Bonnie's, Matt's, Jeremy's absence. She sits with it the way she has been sitting with it since the humanity came back, holding the grief without letting it take her down, finding the specific balance of full feeling and functional living that her new self is still learning to maintain. She thinks about Jeremy. She thinks about what he would say about the last 6 weeks. She thinks about what Bonnie said in the cellar. You owe it to him to feel it. She is feeling it. She is here. That is the work. Graduation is exactly what graduations are. The Mystic Falls High senior class stands in the gymnasium in their caps and gowns and receives their diplomas with a specific mixture of relief and anticipation that 18 years of schooling produces at its end. She stands in the line and she accepts her diploma and she looks at the audience, her people, the ones who survived and the ones who didn't, and she carries the full weight of all of it without going under. Jeremy's empty seat, she knows which one it would have been. She does not look at it long. She looks at it the right amount. Afterward, on the Salvatore property, the party is the specific organized chaos of a group of people who have survived a significant amount together and are acknowledging the surviving. Caroline's toast is Caroline's toast, warm and organized and precise, and full of the specific care that Caroline Forbes brings to every formal occasion. She dances with Stefan, not because it is romantic and she is performing romance, because she wants to. The specific simple fact of wanting to move with this person through this space on this evening, uncomplicated by any of the weight of the last season, just the present moment and the music and his heartbeat and hers. He says, "You're not thinking about anything." She says, "I'm thinking about this." He says, "Is that new?" She says, "For me? Yes." He says, "It looks good on you." She says, "Stop being observational. We're dancing." He smiles. That smile, the one that is not performed, not managed, not deployed for an audience. The specific private smile of Stefan Salvatore, when something has reached him without his knowing it was going to. She says, "Do you know what I thought when I first woke up as a vampire? The first second. Before I said your name," he says, "What?" She says, I thought this is what it's supposed to feel like. All of it. The love and the clarity and the knowledge of what I want. I thought, this was always the version of me that existed. She was just waiting for the right moment to arrive. He says, "She's here now." She says, "She's here now." That heartbeat, the most constant sound in her life. The specific rhythm she has been learning to read for 6 weeks. The thing she would know anywhere under any circumstances against any copy. Real. Present. Correct. Catherine is there. She hears her before she sees her. The heartbeat that has always been slightly wrong. The specific wrongness of someone who has been performing humanity for 500 years, and whose heart has the specific rhythm of someone perpetually calculating. Catherine's heartbeat is never fully at rest. It runs at the frequency of someone who is always positioned for the next move. Catherine is holding the cure. She has it in her hand at the edge of the party, the vial glinting in the light, the single dose that has cost more than anyone wanted to account for. She looks at Elena with the expression she always looks at Elena with. The specific mixture of contempt and recognition, the look of someone who sees themselves reflected in someone else and finds the reflection inadequate. She says, "I'll take it." Elena says, "I know." Catherine says, "If I'm human, Klaus can't use my blood. I'm free." Elena says, "I know that too." Catherine says, "You're going to let me take it." At this woman who has been ahead of everything, who has been 2 steps ahead for 5 centuries, who moved pieces into position for the island, and for Jeremy, and for all of it, with the specific cold efficiency of someone who has survived long enough to stop feeling bad about what survival requires. She says, "I'm not going to let you take it." Catherine's expression shifts, the calculation running. Elena says, "I'm going to give it to you." She crosses the distance. She takes the cure from Catherine's hand with the specific ease of a vampire moving faster than a human can track. She holds it. She looks at it. The single dose, the thing that could restore anyone to humanity, the thing that stopped being about her or Stefan the moment she understood what it was. She says, "You want freedom? Take it." She forces the cure down Catherine's throat, not violently, with the precise efficiency of a vampire, who has determined this is the correct action and is executing it without excess. Catherine's eyes go wide, the calculation interrupted, the outcome diverging from every version of this scenario she had prepared for. Elena steps back. Catherine is human. The process is immediate and visible. The specific recalibration of a body that has been supernatural for 500 years, suddenly running on human biology. The color of her eyes changing, the specific quality of her strength leaving, the heartbeat shifting from the always calculating rhythm to something slower and less controlled, and for the first time, simply human. Catherine looks at her hands. She says, "You just gave me what I wanted." Elena says, "No." She says, "I gave you what you deserved. Mortality, consequences. The specific experience of being a person in the world who cannot outrun everything that comes for her." She says, "Enjoy your brief, fragile life, Catherine. Try to do something worth the brevity." Something moves across her face that is not triumph and not defeat. Something more complicated. The expression of a person who has just been handed the thing they wanted in a form they cannot argue with. By someone they expected to fight. She says nothing. She leaves. Stefan finds Elena on the edge of the property afterward, where the party's noise is present but manageable, where she can hear all the heartbeats of everyone she loves in one continuous ambient monitoring that she has learned to let run passively. He stands beside her. She says, "I know. I watched." She says, "I don't regret it." He says, "I know." She says, "The cure was always going to be used. The only question was who used it for what purpose. I used it to give someone who has been running for 500 years a chance to stop running," she says. Whether she does anything useful with the chance is her problem now. He says, "Very Elena Gilbert." She says, "Is it?" "Yes." She says, "You say that like it's a consistent characteristic." He says, "It's the most consistent characteristic I know." She looks out at the party, at Caroline laughing with Matt, at Bonnie standing at the edge of the group with the specific quality of someone who is present and carrying something privately, the grief for Jeremy that she will carry for a long time, that they all will. At Damon standing with a glass of bourbon and a woman she does not know, the specific body language of someone who is actively trying to move forward rather than merely thinking about it. She says, "Damon brought a date." Stefan says, "Yes." She says, "It's more than okay. It's what I hoped for." She says, "You hoped for him to be okay." He says, "I hoped for him to be more than okay. He was my brother before any of this, and he'll be my brother after. I want him to have something real." She looks at him. She says, "You're a better person than most people give you credit for." He says, "Most people give me too much credit." She says, "No, they give you the wrong kind of credit. They credit you for the restraint and the control. They should credit you for the actual thing, which is that you choose correctly every day, even when choosing correctly costs you something." He is quiet. She says, "The seller, sitting on the floor, telling me the truth without an agenda. That was not restraint, that was active, deliberate, chosen courage." He says, "It was just." She says, "I'm a vampire. My hearing is excellent and my memory is total resolution. I know exactly what it sounded like, what it cost, the specific quality of someone giving their whole self to a thing without a guarantee." She says, "That's who you are, every day." His heartbeat. She says, "I chose you. I chose you before I transitioned, and I choose you now, and I will choose you for as long as I exist. Not because the universe arranged it. Because it's true, and I know it's true, and knowing true things is the one advantage I have over everyone who doesn't look clearly at what's in front of them." She says, "I'm looking clearly." He says, "I know." His hand finding hers. The party continues behind them. Mystic Falls doing what it does, surviving, continuing, the specific tenacity of a town and the people in it who have absorbed enormous things and kept going. She can hear all of it, every heartbeat, every conversation, the ambient frequency of people who are alive. She is alive. She is more herself than she has been since the bridge. Maybe more herself than she has ever been. The version of her that existed underneath all the adaptations, the managing, the grief processing performance, the Elena that was always there, that the transition amplified until she could not be confused about what she was. She is fierce. She is protective to the edge of dangerous. She is clear-eyed about what she loves and what she will burn down anything to protect, and she is watchful of that clarity because watchful is different from afraid. She is a vampire and she is in love, and her brother is dead and she is going to carry that grief for the rest of her existence, and the rest of her existence is a very long time. She is okay, not in the performed sense, in the actual sense. The specific sense of a system that has been through the worst available thing and has come out the other side as the thing it was always going to be. Stefan says, "What are you thinking?" She says, "I'm not thinking about anything." He says, "Good." She says, "Is it?" He says, "It's the best I've seen you look." She turns to look at him, at his face in the party light, at the person she chose with 5 seconds certainty and has been choosing every day since. The specific quality of a love that the universe may have arranged the conditions for, but that she built herself with her own hands, out of her own will. In the specific chosen way of two people who understand what they are to each other and have decided to keep being it. She says, "Stefan." She says, "One more thing." He says, "What?" She says, "Something's wrong." His heartbeat changes. She registers it before he does. The specific shift in the ambient sound of the party. The wrong quality of a heartbeat that she has been tracking all evening, but that has just done something that Stefan's heartbeat does not do. She turns before he does. She reads the party with the full resolution of her new senses, and she finds it. The wrong version, the copy, the specific uncanny valley of a replicated heartbeat, running at a rhythm that has no access to the variables the real version is currently processing. She sees herself talking to it. She sees herself, across the party, smile at the thing wearing Stefan's face. She says, "Stefan is gone." The real Stefan, the man standing beside her, the one with the correct heartbeat, follows her gaze and understands. She looks at the thing wearing his face. The thing wearing his face smiles back at her. Silas. The party continues around them, unaware, the specific oblivious machinery of people who do not know what is standing in the middle of their celebration. She keeps her face completely still. She says, barely a breath, directly into Stefan's ear, "Find him right now. I'll handle this." She starts moving toward Silas. The real Stefan is already gone. She can hear his heartbeat moving fast in the opposite direction, toward wherever Silas has put him, trusting her to hold the line. She walks toward the thing wearing the face she loves, and she reads its heartbeat and she catalogs every variable, and she thinks, "I know what you are. I know what you sound like when you're real, and I know what you sound like when you're a copy." She thinks, "You made a mistake, walking into a party full of the people I will burn anything down to protect." She keeps walking, her face gives nothing away. She has all the clarity in the world. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.